She forged my signature like she was signing her own name. Clean, confident strokes on the scholarship transfer documents while I was in my organic chemistry lab, completely unaware that my future was being rewritten 3 floors below in the registrar's office. When I confronted her 2 hours later, Delilah didn't even have the decency to look ashamed. The Pemberton Merit Scholarship was meant for someone who'd actually use it, she said, clutching the acceptance letter that should have been mine. You're already set with your trust fund. I need this more. $47,000 in scholarship money. Gone. 4 years of undergraduate tuition at Millbrook University transferred to someone who'd barely maintained a 2.8 GPA while I'd graduated summa cum laude. My name is Autumn Calder, and if you think you know how this scholarship theft scandal ends, especially when you find out what my grandfather does for a living, stay tuned. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Because what Delilah didn't know, what none of my family knew, was that Grandfather Theodore wasn't just a retired businessman who occasionally wrote checks for family emergencies. He was Dr. Theodore Calder, founding member and current chairman of the Board of Trustees at Millbrook University, the same university where Delilah had just enrolled using my stolen scholarship, the same institution where his name was etched in gold letters above the main library entrance. The same board that would be reviewing scholarship fraud cases in exactly 2 weeks. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to the beginning, to the moment I realized that family betrayal comes in many forms, and sometimes the people you trust most are the ones who see your success as their personal opportunity. It started with a phone call at 2:47 p.m. on a Tuesday afternoon. I was pipetting solutions for my senior thesis project, my mind focused on the precise measurements that would make or break my graduate school applications, when my phone buzzed with a call from the financial aid office. Miss Calder, we need to clarify some paperwork regarding your Pemberton Merit Scholarship transfer request. Transfer request? I almost dropped my pipette. I'm sorry, what transfer request? I never submitted any transfer. The silence on the other end lasted too long. According to our records, you submitted a formal request this morning to transfer your scholarship eligibility to your cousin, Delilah Hartwell. We have your signature on file, along with a personal statement explaining that you no longer require financial assistance due to family circumstances. My hands went cold. I set down my equipment and walked out of the lab, ignoring my professor's questioning look. Can you describe the person who submitted this paperwork? Young woman, early 20s, blonde hair, about 5'6". She said she was delivering the documents on your behalf because you were in class. Very polite, knew all your personal details. Delilah. My cousin Delilah, who'd been staying in our family's guest house for the past 3 months while she figured things out after dropping out of community college. Delilah, who'd watched me celebrate getting the Pemberton Scholarship last spring. Delilah, who'd suddenly become very interested in higher education after years of calling college a waste of time for rich kids. I ran across campus to the registrar's office, my heart pounding against my ribs. The clerk, a tired-looking woman named Mrs. Finch, pulled up my file with sympathetic eyes. I'm sorry, honey, but the transfer is already processed. The scholarship funds have been applied to your cousin's account. She's enrolled for fall semester starting next week. But I didn't sign anything. Can I see the signature? Mrs. Finch hesitated, then turned her computer screen toward me. There it was. My name, written in handwriting that looked remarkably similar to mine, but with small differences that I immediately recognized. The way the A in autumn curved too sharply, the T that crossed too high. Delilah had practiced, but not enough. This isn't my signature, I said firmly. This is forgery. Mrs. Finch's expression shifted from sympathetic to concerned. That's a very serious accusation, Miss Calder. If you're claiming fraud, I'm not claiming anything. I'm stating a fact. My cousin forged my signature to steal my scholarship. The walk to my car felt surreal, like I was moving through water. My phone kept buzzing with texts from my mother. Delilah is so excited about starting school. Isn't it wonderful that you could help her out? And Dad wants to take everyone to dinner to celebrate Delilah's scholarship. They thought I'd given it to her willingly? My own family believed I'd just handed over nearly $50,000 in educational funding because what? Because I was feeling generous? Because I didn't need it? I sat in my car in the university parking lot, staring at the acceptance letter from Harvard's graduate program that I'd received just last week, the letter that detailed exactly how much my PhD program would cost, how competitive funding was, how my undergraduate scholarship history would factor into future aid decisions. The scholarship that Delilah had just stolen wasn't just money. It was my academic reputation, my financial credibility, my carefully constructed path to becoming a research scientist. But what made my blood run cold wasn't just the theft itself. It was the calculation behind it. Delilah had watched me work for years. She'd seen me study while she partied. She'd watched me graduate with honors while she dropped out. She'd observed my family's pride in my achievements and somehow twisted it into resentment. This wasn't an impulsive decision. This was planned, methodical revenge disguised as desperation. And she'd almost gotten away with it. As I drove home to confront her, I realized something important. Delilah had made one crucial mistake. She'd assumed that because I came from a family with money, I didn't understand the value of earning something myself. She'd assumed that my success was handed to me, not fought for. She'd assumed that I'd be too embarrassed or too polite to make a scene about family business. But most importantly, she'd assumed she knew everything about our family's connections. She had no idea what was coming. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. My name is Autumn Calder, and before this moment, I thought I understood exactly who I was in my family's story. The responsible one, the academic achiever, the daughter who made everyone proud at holiday dinners when they could brag about my 4.0 GPA and research publications. I was the Calder who followed rules, respected boundaries, and believed that hard work would always be rewarded fairly. I was also, apparently, the perfect target for someone who saw my success as something that could simply be transferred to them with a forged signature. But here's what you need to understand about me before this story goes any further. Everything I achieved, I earned twice. Once through my own effort, and once by proving I deserved it despite carrying the Calder name. See, coming from the Calder family in Riverside Heights wasn't exactly a disadvantage, but it wasn't the golden ticket everyone assumed it was either. Yes, we lived in a nice house. Yes, my parents could afford to send me to Westfield Preparatory Academy. But what people didn't see were the expectations that came with that privilege. Every grade was scrutinized. Every achievement was measured not just against my peers, but against generations of Calder family legacy. When your great-grandfather founded the first medical practice in the county, when your grandfather built a business empire, when your father runs the most successful law firm in 3 cities, being good enough simply isn't an option. The trust fund that Delilah mentioned so casually, it existed, technically, but it came with conditions that would make a military contract look flexible. Maintain a 3.8 GPA minimum, graduate with honors, pursue a career in medicine, law, or business, marry within appropriate social circles. The money was there, but it was essentially a golden cage with very specific bars. That's exactly why the Pemberton Merit Scholarship meant everything to me. It wasn't family money with family strings. It was mine, earned through my own merit, my own research, my own late nights in the chemistry lab. When I'd received that scholarship, it was the first time in my life I'd achieved something that was completely, unquestionably mine. No committee of relatives debating whether I'd earned it. No conditions about my future career path. Just recognition for the work I'd put in. I'd spent 4 years at Millbrook University proving I belonged there for reasons beyond my last name. While other students were pledging sororities and attending fraternity parties, I was in the lab until midnight, running experiments for my thesis on sustainable chemical synthesis. While my roommates were spring breaking in Cabo, I was presenting my research at undergraduate conferences. I'd published 2 papers as first author before my senior year, been accepted into Harvard's PhD program with partial funding, and earned the respect of professors who initially assumed I was just another wealthy kid playing at being a scientist. The Pemberton Scholarship was supposed to be my bridge between undergraduate achievement and graduate independence. $47,000 that would cover my remaining undergraduate costs and give me a clean slate for graduate school. More importantly, it was validation that my work mattered beyond my family's influence. And Delilah had stolen it with a pen and some practice sessions copying my handwriting. But here's what makes this betrayal cut so deep. Delilah knew exactly what that scholarship represented to me. She'd been living in our guest house for 3 months, watching me stress over graduate school applications, listening to me explain why I needed to establish financial independence from the family trust. She'd seen me celebrate when the Pemberton notification arrived, had watched me frame the acceptance letter and hang it in my bedroom. She'd even helped me research PhD programs, nodding sympathetically when I explained how competitive graduate funding was, how every scholarship and fellowship mattered. She knew, and she took it anyway. What she didn't know was who she was really stealing from and what kind of institutional power was about to come down on her perfectly manicured head. You see, Grandfather Theodore hadn't built his fortune through law or medicine like the rest of our family. He'd built it through education. After serving in Korea, he'd used the GI Bill to earn his doctorate in education administration. He'd spent 30 years building Millbrook University from a small liberal arts college into one of the premier research institutions in the region. He'd personally recruited Nobel laureates, overseen the construction of 3 new research buildings, and established endowments that had funded hundreds of students' educations. The Calder Science Building wasn't named after our family out of vanity. It was named after Grandfather Theodore because he donated $12 million and 20 years of his life to building the chemistry and physics programs. The same programs where I'd spent the last 4 years earning my reputation as a serious researcher. When Grandfather Theodore had retired 5 years ago, he'd stepped down as university president but remained as chairman of the board of trustees. Every major university decision crossed his desk. Every policy change required his approval. Every case of academic misconduct, scholarship fraud, or ethical violation came before the board he led. And Delilah, in her brilliant plan to steal my scholarship and enroll at Millbrook University using forged documents, had just placed herself directly in his jurisdiction. But she didn't know that. To her, Grandfather Theodore was just the quiet old man who sent birthday cards and asked about her job search at family dinners. She had no idea that the man she'd smiled at over Christmas turkey was the same Dr. Calder whose signature would ultimately determine whether her theft would result in academic probation, permanent expulsion, or criminal charges. I did know, though, and as I drove home to confront my lying, thieving cousin, I realized that for the first time in my life, being a Calder was about to work entirely in my favor. The question wasn't whether Delilah would face consequences for what she'd done. The question was whether I'd be able to control myself long enough to let those consequences unfold properly, or whether I'd ruin everything by strangling her with my bare hands in our driveway. The Pemberton Merit Scholarship wasn't just handed to me because I wrote a good essay. It was the culmination of 3.5 years of methodical, obsessive dedication to proving I belonged in the world of serious academic research. While my high school classmates were figuring out their majors sophomore year, I was already designing independent studies that would set me apart from every other pre-med student applying to graduate programs. It started freshman year with Professor Martinez's organic chemistry class. Most students took it because it was required. I took it because I wanted to understand how molecules could be designed to solve real-world problems. When Professor Martinez mentioned that undergraduate research positions were
highly competitive and rarely available to underclassmen, I didn't hear discouragement. I heard a challenge. I spent my entire freshman year preparing a research proposal on green chemistry synthesis methods. Not because anyone asked me to, but because I wanted Professor Martinez to see that I was serious about science, not just serious about getting into medical school like 90% of her students. I read 50 peer-reviewed papers, taught myself advanced laboratory techniques through online tutorials, and even audited graduate-level physical chemistry lectures without credit. When I finally knocked on Professor Martinez's office door that April with my 20-page research proposal, she looked at me like I'd grown a second head. Miss Calder, most students your age are worried about midterm grades, not designing novel synthetic pathways. Most students my age aren't trying to revolutionize pharmaceutical manufacturing to be environmentally sustainable, I replied. That summer, while Delilah was working part-time at a boutique and spending her evenings at pool parties, I was in the lab 60 hours a week. No pay, no credit, just the opportunity to learn techniques that graduate students typically didn't master until their second year. I made mistakes. I ruined experiments. I accidentally created a small fire in a fume hood that required the fire department to clear the building. But I also discovered a synthetic pathway that reduced toxic waste by 40% compared to traditional methods.
By sophomore year, I wasn't just Professor Martinez's research assistant, I was her research partner. We co-authored my first paper, published in the Journal of Green Chemistry, with me as second author. When I presented our findings at the Regional Undergraduate Research Symposium, 3 graduate programs immediately invited me to apply for their PhD programs. Junior year brought the opportunity that would change everything. The Harrison Fellowship for Advanced Undergraduate Research. Only 1 student per university could apply, and the selection process was brutal. A 50-page research proposal, 3 faculty recommendations, and a presentation to a panel of industry professionals and academic researchers. The Harrison Fellowship wasn't just prestigious, it was career-defining. Previous winners had gone on to Harvard, MIT, Stanford, and Oxford. The fellowship provided $15,000 for research expenses, access to equipment typically reserved for graduate students, and most importantly, the credibility to compete for top-tier graduate programs. I spent the entire summer between sophomore and junior year preparing my application. My research proposal focused on developing biodegradable pharmaceutical compounds that would reduce environmental contamination from medical waste. I'd been working on the theoretical framework for months, but the actual experimental work would require expensive equipment and materials that I couldn't access without fellowship funding. The day I submitted my Harrison Fellowship application, I felt something I'd never experienced before, the certainty that I'd done everything possible to earn something. This wasn't about my family name or my trust fund or my prep school education. This was about 3 years of 16-hour days, failed experiments, and scientific papers read until my eyes burned. When Professor Martinez called me into her office that October, her expression was unreadable. "Autumn, I have news about the Harrison Fellowship." My heart stopped. Everything I'd worked for, everything I'd planned for graduate school hung on her next words. "Congratulations! You're Millbrook University's Harrison Fellow this year." But more than that, the selection committee was so impressed with your proposal that they're recommending you for the Pemberton Merit Scholarship as well. I literally sat down in the chair behind me without meaning to. The Pemberton Merit Scholarship was awarded to only 5 students nationally each year. It provided full undergraduate funding for senior year, plus a guaranteed spot in the Pemberton Graduate Fellowship Program, which would cover the first 2 years of PhD studies at any partner university. "Professor Martinez, are you telling me that I might not have to choose between graduate school and financial independence from my family?" She smiled. "I'm telling you that your work speaks for itself now. The Pemberton Committee specifically noted that your research has exceptional potential for real-world impact and that you've demonstrated unusual commitment to scientific excellence at the undergraduate level." The Pemberton application process was even more rigorous than the Harrison Fellowship. 2 additional research papers, including one where I was first author, a thesis defense in front of a panel of faculty and industry scientists, letters of recommendation from researchers at 3 different universities who'd collaborated with our lab. And then there was the interview. 3 hours of technical questions, ethical scenarios, and research presentations in front of Dr. Patricia Pemberton herself, the pharmaceutical heiress whose foundation funded the scholarship program. Ms. Calder, your research could potentially save pharmaceutical companies millions of dollars in waste disposal costs while reducing environmental impact. But developing this technology will take years of expensive research with no guarantee of success. Why should we bet on you? I looked her directly in the eye. Because I've already proven that I don't quit when experiments fail. I've published original research that other people said was too ambitious for an undergraduate. And because I'm not doing this research to get rich or famous, I'm doing it because someone needs to solve this problem. And I have the skills and determination to be that someone. 6 weeks later, the acceptance letter arrived. Autumn Calder, Pemberton Merit Scholar. Full funding for senior year, guaranteed fellowship consideration for graduate school. More importantly, recognition that my work mattered enough to bet significant money on my future success. I called Grandfather Theodore first, before my parents, before anyone else. Not because I needed his approval, but because he was the only person in my family who truly understood what academic achievement cost. "Autumn," he said when I told him the news, "you've earned something that can never be taken away from you. That scholarship represents your mind, your work, your potential. Guard it carefully." I thought he meant guard it against complacency, against taking success for granted. I had no idea he meant guard it against family members who saw my achievement as their opportunity. 3 months later, as I sat in my car outside our house preparing to confront Delilah about her theft, those words echoed in my mind. She'd taken something that represented 4 years of sacrifice, thousands of hours of work, and the validation of some of the smartest people in my field. But she'd made one crucial mistake. She'd stolen from someone who understands exactly how much documentation and evidence it takes to build a bulletproof case. And I was about to show her what happens when you steal from a scientist who knows how to gather data. I found Delilah exactly where I expected to find her, lounging by our pool in a new bikini that probably cost more than most people's car payments, scrolling through her phone with the kind of relaxed confidence that only comes from believing you've gotten away with something spectacular. She didn't even look up when I walked through the gate, just continued typing what looked like a social media post with one hand while sipping an iced coffee with the other. "Oh, hey, Autumn," she said without lifting her eyes from her screen. "Perfect timing. I was just posting about my first day of college orientation tomorrow. Want to see?" She turned her phone toward me, and I felt something cold and sharp twist in my stomach. There on her Instagram was a carefully curated photo of acceptance letters, scholarship documents, and Millbrook University merchandise, all arranged artfully on her bed. The caption read, "Dreams do come true. Starting my journey at Millbrook University tomorrow thanks to my academic merit scholarship. Sometimes the universe just knows when you're ready for your next chapter. Hashtag blessed, hashtag scholarship recipient, hashtag Millbrook bound, hashtag dreams come true." Academic merit scholarship, I repeated slowly, my voice surprisingly steady despite the rage building behind my ribs. "That's interesting phrasing." Delilah finally looked up, and for just a moment, I caught something flicker across her face. Not guilt, calculation. Like she was rapidly assessing how much I knew and how she should respond. "Well, it is based on merit," she said, with a shrug that was too casual, too practiced. "The scholarship committee obviously thought I deserved it." "The scholarship committee," I said, pulling out my phone and opening my voice recorder app. Something told me I was going to want documentation of this conversation. "You mean the committee that reviewed your application based on my transcript, my research, and my academic achievements?" Now she set down her phone, but still didn't have the decency to look ashamed. Instead, she looked annoyed, like I was being unreasonably difficult about something trivial. "Autumn, you're being dramatic. You don't even need that money.
Your trust fund could pay for graduate school 10 times over. I checked. You checked my trust fund? It's not a secret. Everyone knows the Calders are loaded. Besides, didn't you always say you wanted to be independent from family money? Now you can be. You should be thanking me for forcing you to stick to your principles. The audacity was breathtaking. She'd stolen my scholarship and was now trying to frame it as doing me a favor? But what made my blood freeze wasn't her twisted logic. It was the phrase, "I checked," because that implied research, planning, deliberate investigation into my financial situation. How exactly did you check my trust fund, Delilah? She waved her hand dismissively. Your mom mentioned the details at Christmas dinner. She was bragging about how well the family investments were doing, how you'd never have to worry about money like normal people do. That wasn't true. I remembered that Christmas dinner vividly because I'd spent most of it explaining to relatives why I was working so hard for scholarships when I didn't need them. Mom had talked about the family's financial stability, but she'd never mentioned specific trust fund amounts because she didn't know them. Only grandfather Theodore and the family attorney had access to those details. Delilah, what else did you check while you were planning this? I wasn't planning anything, she snapped, and there was the first crack in her composed facade. I saw an opportunity to better my life, and I took it. You would have done the same thing in my position. No, I wouldn't have, because I'm not a thief. Thief, she laughed, but it sounded forced. Autumn, we're family. Family shares. Besides, you're acting like I burned down your house or something. It's just money. It's not just money. It's 4 years of my life. It's recognition for work that you've never done. It's my reputation and my future, and you forged my signature to steal it. For the first time, Delilah's expression shifted into something that might have been concern. Forged? That's a really serious accusation, Autumn. I hope you're not planning to make trouble over this. The threat was subtle, but unmistakable. And that's when I realized this wasn't just about the scholarship. This was about power, about putting me in my place, about punishing me for having something she wanted. What trouble could I possibly make? I asked innocently. After all, you must have proper documentation for your scholarship application. Transcripts, recommendation letters, research portfolios. I'm sure everything is completely legitimate. Delilah's face went pale. Of course it's legitimate. Great. Then you won't mind if I call the registrar's office right now and ask them to review your application materials, just to clear up any confusion. Autumn, don't be ridiculous. Why would you do that? Because I want to understand how someone with a 2.8 GPA from community college managed to qualify for a merit scholarship that requires a minimum 3.9 GPA and original research publications.
The silence stretched between us like a wire about to snap. Delilah set down her coffee cup, and I noticed her hands were shaking slightly. Fine, she said finally. Fine. Maybe I enhanced some of the application materials. But it's not like I hurt anyone. You'll get other scholarships. You'll be fine. Enhanced. She'd enhanced her application with my entire academic record, and she was still trying to minimize what she'd done. Enhanced how exactly? Does it matter? What's done is done. The scholarship money is already applied to my tuition. They're not going to reverse it now just because you're jealous. Jealous? She thought I was jealous of her theft? But then she said something that made everything click into place. Something that showed me just how deep this betrayal actually went. Besides, it's not like you earned that scholarship all by yourself anyway. Everyone knows your grandfather has connections at Millbrook. The scholarship committee probably felt obligated to pick a Calder. And there it was. The real reason behind her theft wasn't just opportunity or desperation. It was resentment. She'd convinced herself that my achievements weren't legitimate, that everything I'd earned was just handed to me because of my family name. In her mind, she wasn't stealing from me, she was leveling the playing field. She thought she was taking something I didn't deserve from someone who'd been given unfair advantages. She had no idea she'd just declared war on the man who'd built the very institution she was trying to cheat. "Delilah," I said quietly, "you just made a very big mistake." "What mistake? Telling you the truth about how the world really works?" I smiled, and even I could hear the ice in it. "No, assuming you knew how the world really works." I turned and walked back toward the house, leaving her by the pool with her stolen documents and her delusional sense of victory. But as I reached the sliding door, I heard her call after me. "Autumn, where are you going?" I paused but didn't turn around. "To make a phone call to someone who actually understands how merit scholarships work." "Don't you dare cause trouble for me over this." Now I did turn around, and the fear in her eyes told me she was finally beginning to understand that she might have miscalculated. "Delilah," I said, "you just made a very big mistake." "What mistake? Telling you the truth about how the world really works?" I smiled, and I walked into the house. I walked into the house expecting to find my parents in their usual evening routine. Dad reviewing legal briefs in his study, Mom organizing charity committee paperwork in the kitchen. Instead, I found them sitting together at the dining room table, speaking in the kind of hushed, urgent tones that immediately told me I'd stumbled into the middle of something I wasn't supposed to hear. They looked up when I entered, and the guilty expressions that flashed across their faces confirmed my worst suspicions. This wasn't just about Delilah's impulsive theft. This was bigger. "Autumn, sweetheart," Mom said quickly, her voice artificially bright. "How was your day? Did you get a chance to talk to Delilah about her exciting news?" "You mean her theft of my scholarship?" I asked, crossing my arms and studying their faces carefully. "Yes, we talked." Dad set down the document he'd been reading and sighed heavily. "Autumn, sit down. We need to discuss this situation rationally." "Rationally?" I remained standing. "Dad, she forged my signature and stole $47,000 in scholarship money. What exactly requires rational discussion?" "The family implications," Mom said softly. "Honey, I know you're upset, but Delilah has been struggling so much since she dropped out of community college. She's been depressed, directionless. When she told us about her plan to go back to school—" "Her plan?" The words hit me like ice water. "Mom, are you telling me you knew about this before it happened?" The silence that followed was deafening. Dad set down the document he'd been reading and sighed heavily. "Autumn, sit down. We need to discuss this situation carefully." This time I did sit, but only because my legs suddenly felt unsteady. "How long have you known?" "Delilah approached us 3 weeks ago," Dad said carefully, slipping into his lawyer voice, measured, precise, designed to minimize legal exposure. She was distraught about her lack of direction, worried about disappointing the family further. She mentioned that she'd looked into returning to school but couldn't afford it. "And you suggested she steal my scholarship?" "Of course not," Mom said quickly. "We suggested she apply for financial aid, look into community college programs, consider a payment plan. But then she pointed out that you'd received multiple scholarship offers, that you had family resources available for graduate school, that perhaps what, Mom?" Dad leaned forward, his expression earnest in the way that had convinced countless juries over the years. "Autumn, you have to understand the position we were in. Your cousin was desperate. talking about feeling like a failure, wondering if she'd ever amount to anything. Meanwhile, you'd been accepted to Harvard with partial funding already secured. So you told her she could have my scholarship? We told her, Mom said slowly, that family sometimes means making sacrifices for each other, that maybe there was a way for both of you to get what you needed. The room spun slightly as the implications sank in. You knew she was going to forge my signature? We didn't know specifics, Dad said quickly. We certainly didn't encourage any irregularities in the application process. But when she mentioned that scholarship transfers were sometimes possible between family members, they're not possible, Dad. You know they're not possible. Scholarship transfers require the original recipient's explicit written consent, verified through multiple channels. You're a lawyer. You know what constitutes fraud. Mom reached across the table toward me. Sweetheart, we thought you'd understand once you saw how happy it made her. You've always been so generous, so willing to help family. Generous? I stood up abruptly, my chair scraping against the hardwood floor. I've been generous with my time, my help, my tutoring, my connections. I've never been asked to be generous with my identity and my future. Autumn, please don't be dramatic, Dad said. This doesn't change your future. You're brilliant. You'll find other opportunities. Other opportunities? My voice was getting louder, but I didn't care. Dad, do you understand what the Pemberton Scholarship represents? It's not just money. It's recognition from a foundation that funds exactly 5 students per year nationally. It's credibility that opens doors to research positions, graduate fellowships, industry connections. Delilah didn't just steal money from me. She stole my professional reputation. Which you can rebuild, Mom said firmly. You're a Calder. You have advantages that Delilah has never had. And there it was. The same logic that Delilah had used. The same assumption that my achievements were somehow less valid because of my family name. My own parents believed that what I'd earned through 4 years of obsessive work was disposable because I'd been born into privilege. Mom, do you think I didn't earn that scholarship? Of course you earned it, honey. But you've earned lots of things. Delilah has never earned anything like this before. We hoped you'd see this as an opportunity to help her finally feel successful. I walked to the window and stared out at the pool where Delilah had been lounging just 30 minutes earlier, probably still convinced she'd gotten away with the perfect crime. How many people know about this? What do you mean? Dad asked. I mean, how many family members knew that Delilah was planning to steal my scholarship? Another silence. Longer this time. Your Aunt Rebecca knew that Delilah was struggling financially, and your Uncle Mark mentioned that maybe there were family resources that could help with education costs. Uncle Mark suggested this? Not specifically, Dad said quickly, but he did point out that different family members have different needs at different times and that successful families find ways to redistribute resources where they're most needed. I turned back to face them. Anyone else? Mom looked down at her hands. Your cousin Bradley mentioned that he'd heard about scholarship transfer programs at his company. He thought it might be worth looking into. Bradley knew, too. It wasn't a question anymore. It was a realization. How many people were involved in planning this theft, Mom? It wasn't theft, Dad said sharply. It was a family decision to reallocate resources to where they were most needed. A family decision that didn't include the family member whose resources were being reallocated. We planned to talk to you about it, Mom said weakly, but Delilah was so excited and the deadline was approaching, and we thought once it was done you'd see the benefits. The benefits of having my identity stolen and my reputation compromised? The benefits of helping your cousin turn her life around, Dad said firmly. Autumn, your grandfather always taught us that family takes care of family. Sometimes that means personal sacrifice. Did you ask Grandfather Theodore about this family decision? The look that passed between my parents told me everything I needed to know. Dad's face went slightly pale. Your grandfather doesn't need to be involved in every family discussion, especially not when the family discussion involves defrauding the university where he serves as chairman of the board of trustees. What did you say? Mom's coffee cup clattered against her saucer. What did you say? Did you really think I wouldn't tell him? Did you really think I would just quietly accept that my own family conspired to steal my scholarship and let them get away with it? Dad stood up slowly. Autumn, you haven't contacted your grandfather about this, have you? Why? Is there some reason I shouldn't discuss scholarship fraud with the man who oversees scholarship fraud investigations at Millbrook University? The color drained completely from Mom's face. Oh God, Autumn, you don't understand what you're doing. I understand exactly what I'm doing. I'm reporting a crime to the appropriate authority. The question is, do you understand what you've done? Dad was already reaching for his phone. We need to call Rebecca and Mark. We need to figure out how to what, Dad? How to cover up fraud? How to obstruct an investigation? You're a lawyer. How many more felonies do you want to add to this situation? Autumn, please, Mom said, tears starting to form in her eyes. Please don't destroy our family over this. I looked at my parents, really looked at them. These were the people who'd raised me to value integrity, honesty, hard work. These were the people who'd taught me that actions have consequences and that character matters more than convenience. And they just admitted to conspiring with half our extended family to steal my future because they thought I had enough advantages that I could afford to lose one. Mom, I said quietly, you destroyed our family when you decided my achievements were disposable. I'm just making sure there are consequences for that decision. I walked toward the stairs, but Dad's voice stopped me. Autumn, if you involved your grandfather in this, it won't just affect Delilah. It could affect all of us. There could be criminal charges, professional consequences. I turned back to face him. Then you should have thought about that before you helped her commit fraud. As I climbed the stairs to my room, I could hear them frantically making phone calls, trying to warn the rest of the conspiracy that their perfect crime was about to unravel. But it was too late for damage control, because they'd made one crucial mistake in their family resource reallocation plan. They'd forgotten that Grandfather Theodore hadn't built his legacy by tolerating people who cheated the system he'd spent his life creating. And they were about to learn what happened when you stole from his granddaughter. I locked my bedroom door and sat at my desk, staring at my laptop screen for a full minute before I started typing. The scientist in me knew that emotions make terrible evidence, but documentation builds bulletproof cases. If I was going to do this, if I was going to take down not just Delilah, but the entire family conspiracy that had enabled her, I needed to approach this like a research project. Methodical, thorough, undeniable. I opened a new folder on my desktop and labeled it Scholarship Fraud Evidence. Then I began building the case that would either restore my future or destroy my family. Possibly both. First, I needed to establish the timeline. I pulled up my email archives and started screenshotting every communication related to the Pemberton Scholarship. The original notification email from Dr. Pemberton's foundation, dated March 15th, my acceptance response, sent the same day, the follow-up emails about documentation requirements, fund disbursement schedules, and university notification procedures. Every email clearly stated that scholarship transfers were prohibited without explicit written consent from the original recipient, verified through a secure authentication process that included phone interviews and notarized documents. The foundation's policies were crystal clear. Any attempt to fraudulently transfer scholarship funds would result in immediate revocation and potential legal action. Next, I documented my conversation with Delilah. I transcribed everything I could remember from our poolside confrontation, including her admission that she'd enhanced her application materials and her comment about checking my trust fund. I pulled up her Instagram post and took screenshots, paying particular attention to her claims about academic merit and dreams coming true. But the real smoking gun was in my text message history. I scrolled back 3 weeks of family communications looking for any mention of Delilah's education plans. There it was, a group text from Mom to the family chat dated exactly 3 weeks ago. Family meeting tomorrow night to discuss Delilah's situation. She's really struggling and needs our support. Let's brainstorm ways to help her get back on track. Rebecca, Mark, Bradley, your input would be especially valuable. I screenshotted the message and kept scrolling. The next day, another message from Mom. Thank you all for the productive discussion last night. Delilah is so grateful for the family's creative problem solving. Autumn, we'll fill you in on the details when you're free. Except they never did fill me in, because the creative problem solving involved stealing from me. I found more evidence in the family chat over the following weeks. Uncle Mark sharing links to articles about education financing. Aunt Rebecca posting motivational quotes about family supporting family. Bradley sending information about scholarship transfer procedures that were completely irrelevant to merit-based awards, but might have looked convincing to people who didn't understand the system. Then I found the message that made my blood freeze. From 2 days ago, in a private text thread between Mom and Aunt Rebecca that had accidentally been sent to the family group chat before being quickly deleted. Rebecca: has Autumn said anything about her scholarship status? Delilah is getting nervous about starting classes tomorrow.
Nothing yet. I think we're in the clear. She's been so focused on her Harvard preparations that she probably hasn't even checked her Millbrook account. Good. The less she knows until Delilah is settled in, the better. Once it's a done deal, she'll have to accept it. Exactly. It's easier to ask forgiveness than permission, especially when you know the person will forgive you eventually. They'd planned for me to find out only after it was too late to reverse the theft. They'd counted on my loyalty to family, my reluctance to cause drama, my tendency to put other people's feelings before my own sense of justice. They'd counted wrong. I took screenshots of everything, then began documenting the technical aspects of the fraud. I logged into my Millbrook student portal and found the scholarship transfer request that had been submitted using my forged signature. The document was still accessible in my account history, and I could see exactly what Delilah had submitted. She'd used my student ID number, my social security number, my academic record, and my research portfolio. But she'd also submitted additional materials that I'd never created. A personal statement explaining why I no longer needed the scholarship, a financial disclosure form claiming I'd received substantial family funding that made merit aid unnecessary, and a recommendation that Delilah Hartwell be considered as a replacement recipient due to her exceptional potential and financial need. The personal statement was particularly damning because it was written in my voice, but contained information I'd never shared publicly. Details about my trust fund, my family's financial status, my graduate school funding situation. Information that could only have come from family members who'd heard these details in private conversations. I downloaded every document, saved copies to 3 different drives, and printed hard copies that I locked in my FireSafe file box. Then I began researching the legal implications of what my family had done. Scholarship fraud was a federal crime when it involved interstate transactions, which this did. The Pemberton Foundation was headquartered in California, Millbrook University was in our state, and the scholarship funds had crossed state lines. The penalties included fines up to $250,000 and prison sentences up to 5 years per count. Identity theft added additional charges. Conspiracy to commit fraud added more charges for each person involved. If I reported this properly, my parents could face disbarment proceedings. My uncle could lose his medical license. My aunt's nonprofit could lose its tax-exempt status. Bradley's security clearance for his government job could be revoked. The family had gambled with all of their professional futures to steal mine. I pulled up the Millbrook University website and found the contact information for the Office of Academic Integrity. Dr. Sarah Chen, Director of Academic Ethics, with a direct phone line and email address. Her bio mentioned that she'd previously worked for the Department of Education investigating financial aid fraud. Then I found the Pemberton Foundation's fraud reporting hotline, a dedicated team that investigated scholarship misuse with authority to coordinate with federal agencies when criminal activity was suspected. Finally, I looked up the Board of Trustees' contact information for Millbrook University. Chairman of the board, Dr. Theodore Calder. There was his photo, his official biography, his direct email address. My grandfather, who'd built his career on educational integrity, who'd spent decades creating systems to ensure that deserving students received opportunities based on merit. My grandfather who'd taught me that honesty wasn't just morally right, but practically necessary for any system to function properly. My grandfather who was about to learn that his own family had corrupted the institution he'd dedicated his life to protecting. I drafted 3 emails, but didn't send them yet. One to Dr. Chen, outlining the fraud and requesting an investigation. One to the Pemberton Foundation, reporting the misuse of their scholarship funds. And one to Grandfather Theodore, with all the evidence attached and a simple subject line, urgent, academic fraud involving family members. Before I sent anything, I called my research advisor, Professor Martinez. If I was going to blow up my family's life, I needed to make sure I wasn't destroying my own academic future in the process. Autumn, she answered on the first ring. How are the Harvard preparations going? Professor Martinez, I need to ask you about something sensitive. If a student discovered that a family member had committed scholarship fraud using their identity, what would be the proper way to report it? A long pause. That's a very serious situation, Autumn. Are you speaking hypothetically? No, I'm not. Another pause. Do you have documentation of this fraud? Extensive documentation. Then you need to report it immediately to the appropriate authorities. Academic fraud undermines the integrity of the entire educational system. No matter who's involved, no matter what the personal cost, it has to be stopped. Even if it destroys relationships with people I love?
Autumn? People who commit fraud have already chosen to destroy their relationships with you. You're not responsible for the consequences of their choices. You're only responsible for ensuring that the truth comes to light. After I hung up, I sat in my room listening to the voices downstairs. I could hear Mom crying, Dad making increasingly desperate phone calls, and through my window, I could see Delilah pacing by the pool, frantically texting someone. They were trying to figure out how to contain the damage, how to convince me to stay quiet, how to protect themselves from the consequences of what they'd done. But it was too late for damage control. Because while they'd been planning their theft, I'd been learning how to build cases based on evidence rather than emotions. And the evidence was overwhelming. I clicked send on all 3 emails simultaneously, then leaned back in my chair and waited for the storm that was about to break over my family's carefully constructed world of entitlement and rationalization. Within an hour, my phone started ringing, but I didn't answer it, because I was done being the family member who cleaned up other people's messes. It was time for them to face the consequences of their choices. The first response came at 6:47 a.m. the next morning. I was already awake, having spent most of the night staring at the ceiling and listening to hushed conversations echoing through the house. My phone buzzed with an email from Dr. Sarah Chen at the Office of Academic Integrity, marked as urgent and confidential. Ms. Calder, thank you for bringing this matter to our attention. Based on your initial report, we are opening a formal investigation into potential academic fraud. Please be available for a phone interview today at 10 a.m. We will also need to examine all original documentation you referenced. This matter will be handled with complete confidentiality until our investigation is complete. Dr. Sarah Chen, Director of Academic Ethics. 20 minutes later, another email arrived from the Pemberton Foundation's fraud investigation team. Ms. Calder, we have received your report regarding unauthorized use of Pemberton Merit Scholarship funds. A federal investigation has been initiated. Please do not discuss this matter with any involved parties pending our review. Agent Patricia Morrison will contact you within 24 hours. Pemberton Foundation Security Division. Federal investigation. The words sent a chill down my spine, but also a strange sense of validation. This wasn't just family drama anymore. This was serious enough to warrant federal attention. The third email was from Grandfather Theodore, sent at 5:30 a.m. Autumn, I received your message. Please come to my office at the university at 9 a.m. Bring all original documentation. We need to discuss the situation immediately before it escalates further. Tell no one about this meeting. Grandfather. I showered and dressed carefully, choosing my most professional outfit, a navy blazer and slacks that made me look older, more serious, like someone whose accusations should be taken seriously rather than dismissed as family drama. I gathered all my printed evidence into a leather portfolio that Dad had given me for Christmas, noting the irony that I was using his gift to build a case that might destroy his career. Downstairs, the house felt like a crime scene. Mom was sitting at the kitchen table in yesterday's clothes, surrounded by tissues and empty coffee cups. Dad was in his study behind closed doors, and I could hear his voice through the wall, sharp, urgent, lawyer voice in crisis management mode. There was no sign of Delilah. "Autumn," Mom said when she saw me. Her eyes were red and puffy. "Sweetheart, we need to talk before you do anything irreversible." "I already did something irreversible, Mom. I reported the crime that you helped plan." "It's not a crime. It's a family misunderstanding that got out of hand. We can fix this quietly without involving outsiders." I poured myself coffee and studied her face. She genuinely believed what she was saying. After decades of smoothing over family conflicts, managing social situations, and maintaining appearances, she'd convinced herself that federal fraud was just another family problem that could be resolved with the right conversation. "Where's Delilah?" "She left early this morning. She's scared, Autumn. She's just a kid who made a mistake." "She's 22 years old, and she committed identity theft and fraud. That's not a mistake, Mom. That's a crime." Dad emerged from his study, phone still pressed to his ear. When he saw me, he ended his call abruptly. "Autumn, we need to discuss the situation rationally. I've been speaking with colleagues about the best way to handle this without destroying everyone's futures." "You mean without destroying everyone's futures except mine?" "Your future isn't destroyed. You're brilliant. You'll recover from this. But if you pursue formal charges, there will be consequences for people who don't deserve them. People like you and Mom who planned this theft?" Dad's jaw tightened. "We didn't plan anything illegal. We had a family discussion about resources and opportunities. What Delilah did with that information was her decision." "Dad, you're a lawyer. You know that conspiracy doesn't require you to personally forge the documents. It just requires you to knowingly participate in planning the fraud."
There was no fraud. There was a misunderstanding about scholarship eligibility that can be corrected through proper channels. I looked at my father, this man who'd taught me about justice, about the importance of standing up for what's right, about how legal systems exist to protect people from exactly this kind of abuse. And he was standing in our kitchen trying to convince me that planned theft was a misunderstanding. "Dad, I have recordings of Delilah admitting she forged my signature. I have text messages from you and Mom discussing how to keep me from finding out until it was too late to reverse. I have documentation showing that she used private family information that could only have come from conversations with you. How exactly is that a misunderstanding?" The color drained from his face. "You recorded family conversations?" "I documented admissions of criminal activity. There's a difference." My phone rang. "Dr. Chen, 10 minutes early for our scheduled call." I answered while maintaining eye contact with my parents. "Miss Calder, thank you for being available. I've had a chance to review your initial documentation and I have some follow-up questions. First, are you currently in a safe environment where you can speak freely?" I looked at my parents, who were hanging on every word. "Not entirely. I'm with family members who were involved in the planning of this fraud." "I see. Are you able to come to campus for an in-person interview instead?" "Yes, I can be there in 30 minutes. "Excellent. Please bring all original documentation. And, Miss Calder, given the serious nature of these allegations, I want you to know that the university takes academic fraud extremely seriously. If your evidence supports your claims, there will be significant consequences for all involved parties."
After I hung up, my parents stared at me with expressions I'd never seen before. Not anger, not disappointment, fear. "Autumn," Mom said quietly, "you're really going to do this. You're really going to destroy our family over money." "I'm not destroying our family over money. You already destroyed our family when you chose to steal from me. I'm just making sure there are consequences for that choice." I walked toward the door, but Dad's voice stopped me. "If you go through with this, if you involve the university officially, there's no taking it back. Once this becomes public record, it will follow all of us forever." "Then you should have thought about that before you helped Delilah commit fraud." "Autumn, please, think about what you're doing to people you love." I turned back to face him. "Dad, you didn't think about what you were doing to someone you love when you helped steal my future. Why should I be held to a different standard?" As I drove to campus, my phone buzzed constantly with calls and texts from family members. Uncle Mark, "Autumn, we need to talk before this gets out of hand." Aunt Rebecca, "Please call me. There are things you don't understand about Delilah's situation." Bradley, "Heard there's some family drama. Let's grab coffee and work this out." They were all scrambling now, trying to manage the crisis they had created. But their messages revealed something important. They still thought this was something that could be worked out through family pressure and negotiation. They hadn't grasped that I'd moved this beyond family dynamics into institutional and legal territory. They still thought I was the same person who'd always prioritized family harmony over personal justice. They were about to learn otherwise. I parked outside the administration building and sat for a moment, looking up at the Calder Science Building where I'd spent the last 4 years building my reputation as a serious researcher. The building that bore my family's name because Grandfather Theodore had believed in the importance of merit-based achievement and institutional integrity, the same principles that his own family had just violated. I pulled out my phone and sent one final text to the family group chat. "I'm about to meet with university officials about the scholarship fraud. Anyone who wants to confess their involvement and cooperate with the investigation should contact Dr. Sarah Chen's office immediately. This is your only opportunity to get ahead of this situation." Then I turned off my phone, gathered my evidence portfolio, and walked into the building where my family's legacy was about to be either restored or permanently destroyed. Because sometimes protecting the institutions that matter requires sacrificing the people who've corrupted them, even when those people raised you. Dr. Sarah Chen's office felt like a courtroom, all polished wood and serious legal texts, with windows that looked out over the quad where I'd spent countless hours studying for the exams that had earned me the scholarship Delilah stole.
"Miss Calder," she said, gesturing to the chair across from her desk. "Before we begin, I want you to understand the gravity of what you're alleging. Academic fraud at this level involves potential federal crimes, professional consequences for multiple parties, and significant reputational damage to the university. Are you prepared to proceed with these allegations under oath?"
Yes, ma'am. I have extensive documentation to support everything I'm about to tell you. I opened my portfolio and began laying out the evidence methodically. Email screenshots, text message threads, official university documents, forged signatures, financial records. Dr. Chen examined each piece carefully, occasionally asking clarifying questions or requesting additional context. "This personal statement allegedly written by you," she said, holding up Delilah's forged document. "Can you identify specific elements that prove you didn't write it?" "Several things. First, I've never used the phrase substantial family funding to describe my financial situation. I'm very careful about language related to family wealth because I've worked hard to establish my academic credibility independently. Second, this statement claims I no longer need merit-based aid due to trust fund access, but my trust fund has specific conditions that make it unsuitable for graduate school funding. Third, the writing style is wrong. I don't use passive voice construction the way this author does." Dr. Chen made notes. "And you believe your cousin Delilah Hartwell wrote this statement?" "I believe she wrote it using information provided by my parents and other family members who were aware of my financial circumstances." "Explain." I pulled out the family text message threads.
3 weeks ago, my parents held a family meeting to discuss Delilah's situation. Based on these messages, multiple family members contributed information and suggestions for how to help her access educational funding. This included my Uncle Mark researching scholarship transfer processes, my cousin Bradley sharing information about educational financing options, and my parents providing specific details about my trust fund and graduate school plans. Dr. Chen's expression grew increasingly serious as she read through the evidence. Ms. Calder, are you alleging that your immediate family members conspired to facilitate this fraud? I'm alleging that they provided the information and encouragement that made this fraud possible, with full knowledge that scholarship transfers of this type are prohibited without explicit consent from the original recipient. And you never gave such consent? I was never asked for consent. I wasn't even told about their plan until after Delilah had already enrolled using my stolen scholarship. Dr. Chen leaned back in her chair. Ms. Calder, I need to ask you about your grandfather's position on the Board of Trustees. Are you expecting preferential treatment because of your family connection? The question hit exactly where it was supposed to hit. Dr. Chen, if I wanted preferential treatment, I would have asked my family to handle this quietly. Instead, I'm here providing evidence of crimes committed by my own relatives, including potential criminal charges that could affect my grandfather's reputation. I'm not asking for preferential treatment. I'm asking for equal treatment under the university's academic integrity policies. And if those policies result in criminal charges against your family members, then they should face the same consequences as any other criminals who commit fraud against this institution. Dr. Chen studied me for a long moment. Ms. Calder, in my experience, students don't usually pursue formal charges against family members unless the situation is extremely serious or there's been a pattern of abuse. Can you help me understand why you're choosing this path rather than seeking a family resolution? I'd been expecting this question, and I'd prepared for it carefully. Dr. Chen, this isn't about family dynamics or personal conflicts. This is about institutional integrity. My cousin didn't just steal money from me. She corrupted the merit-based system that determines which students receive recognition for their achievements. If the university allows scholarship fraud to be resolved through family discussions, it sends a message that academic fraud is acceptable as long as the perpetrators have the right connections. And you believe formal prosecution serves the university's interests better than quiet resolution? I believe that universities exist to reward merit and punish fraud regardless of who commits it. If my grandfather's position on the Board of Trustees means that fraud committed against his granddaughter gets special treatment, then the institution he has spent his life building becomes meaningless. Dr. Chen made several more notes, then pulled out a digital recorder. Ms. Calder, I'm going to record your formal statement. This recording may be used in legal proceedings, administrative hearings, and federal investigations. Do you consent to being recorded? Yes. For the next hour, I walked through every detail of the fraud, the family conspiracy, and the evidence I'd collected. Dr. Chen asked pointed questions about dates, times, conversations, and documentation. She requested specific details about my academic achievements, my scholarship application process, and my financial circumstances. When we finished, she turned off the recorder and looked at me seriously. Ms. Calder, based on your testimony and evidence, I'm recommending that this case be referred to federal authorities for criminal investigation. The university will also be conducting its own internal investigation, which may result in Delilah Hartwell's immediate expulsion and the revocation of any credits or degrees associated with fraudulently obtained enrollment.
What about the family members who facilitated the fraud? If they are university employees or alumni, they may face sanctions through our professional conduct policies. If they're not directly affiliated with the university, their exposure will be primarily through federal criminal charges. My phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. Autumn, this is Delilah. We need to talk before you ruin everyone's lives. Meet me at Riverside Coffee at 2 p.m. Come alone. I showed the message to Dr. Chen. Should I meet with her? Absolutely not. You're now a witness in a federal investigation. Any contact with the subject of that investigation could be seen as intimidation or obstruction. Forward that message to me immediately. As I walked out of Dr. Chen's office, I felt something I hadn't experienced since this whole situation began. Complete clarity about what I was doing and why it mattered. This wasn't about revenge or family drama. This was about ensuring that institutions designed to recognize merit actually functioned according to their stated principles. My phone started ringing immediately. Mom, Dad, Uncle Mark, Aunt Rebecca, even numbers I didn't recognize. I let them all go to voicemail. But then I saw a text from Grandfather Theodore. Autumn, emergency board meeting called for 4 p.m. today. Your allegations have reached the federal level. Please come to my office at 3:30. We need to discuss strategy. Strategy. Not damage control, not family reconciliation. Strategy. For the first time since this began, I felt like someone in my family understood the seriousness of what had happened. I drove to the coffee shop where Delilah had asked to meet, not to see her, but to observe. From my car across the street, I could see her sitting alone at a corner table, checking her phone constantly, looking increasingly agitated as 2 p.m. came and went. She was still beautiful, still perfectly put together, still carrying herself with the confidence of someone who'd always been able to charm her way out of consequences. But there was something desperate in her posture now, something that suggested she was finally beginning to understand that charm wouldn't be enough to fix what she'd broken. At 2:30, she gathered her things and left, pulling out her phone as she walked to her car. My phone buzzed with another text from her number. I know you're investigating me. This doesn't have to destroy everyone. Call me. I screenshotted the message and forwarded it to Dr. Chen, then typed a response. All communication regarding this matter should go through Dr. Sarah Chen at the Office of Academic Integrity. I will not be responding to further contact attempts. As I drove toward Grandfather Theodore's office, I realized that Delilah was finally experiencing what I'd felt 3 days ago when I discovered her theft. The sick realization that your entire future might be determined by choices that other people make. The difference was that her future was being determined by choices she had made. And now she was about to learn what happens when those choices collide with institutions that take integrity seriously. Grandfather Theodore's office occupied the entire corner of the administration building's top floor, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the campus he'd spent decades building. When I arrived at 3:30, he was standing at those windows with his back to me, hands clasped behind him, in the posture I remembered from childhood, the stance he took when he was making decisions that would affect hundreds of people. "Grandfather," I said quietly. He turned, and I saw something in his expression that I'd never seen before, a mixture of pride and profound sadness. "Autumn, sit down. We have 20 minutes before the emergency board meeting, and there are things you need to understand about what's about to happen." I sat in the leather chair across from his desk, the same chair where I'd told him about my acceptance to Harvard just 2 months ago. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was now sitting in the same spot to discuss my family's attempt to destroy the achievements we'd celebrated together. "First," Grandfather said, settling behind his desk, "I reviewed all the evidence you submitted. Dr. Chen briefed me an hour ago, and Agent Morrison from the federal investigation called 30 minutes ago. What your cousin and your parents did constitutes multiple federal crimes." Agent Morrison? FBI White-Collar Crime Division. Scholarship fraud that crosses state lines falls under federal jurisdiction, especially when it involves falsified federal financial aid documents. The Pemberton Foundation's complaint triggered an automatic federal investigation. The weight of those words settled over me. FBI, federal crimes. This had escalated far beyond what I had imagined when I first discovered Delilah's theft. "Grandfather, I need you to know that I didn't report this to get preferential treatment because you're on the board. I reported it because it was the right thing to do."
That's just the beginning. The Board of Trustees is meeting in emergency session because this fraud directly impacts the university's accreditation, our federal funding eligibility, and our relationship with scholarship foundations. When a student commits fraud of this magnitude,
especially fraud that involves identity theft and falsified federal documents. It triggers reviews of our entire academic integrity system. I felt cold suddenly. Are you saying the university could face consequences because of what Delilah did? I'm saying that when the granddaughter of the board chairman reports that her family conspired to defraud the institution and we don't handle it properly, it calls into question our commitment to the principles we claim to uphold. But you didn't know anything about their plan? That's irrelevant. The appearance of impropriety is almost as damaging as actual impropriety. If this becomes public before we've taken decisive action, the media narrative will be that Millbrook University protects connected families who commit fraud. Grandfather stood and walked to a wall lined with framed photographs. Decades of graduation ceremonies, groundbreaking events, academic achievements. Autumn, I built this institution on the principle that merit matters more than connections. Your cousin's fraud attacks the foundation of everything I've worked for. What does that mean for my family? He turned back to me, his expression grave. Autumn, it means that in approximately 15 minutes, I'm going to recommend to the Board of Trustees that we pursue the maximum possible sanctions against all involved parties, including criminal prosecution and civil recovery of damages. It means that your parents' law firm will likely lose the university as a client. It means that your uncle's medical practice will face scrutiny from professional licensing boards. It means that your aunt's nonprofit will be investigated for potential financial irregularities. And what does it mean for you? It means I have to choose between protecting my family and protecting my life's work. He sat back down, suddenly looking every one of his 78 years. Autumn, do you understand what you're asking me to do? I'm asking you to uphold the principles you taught me. I'm asking you to treat this case the same way you'd treat it if the fraud had been committed by strangers. Even if it destroys our family? I thought about that question carefully. Grandfather, our family was destroyed the moment they decided my achievements were disposable. I'm just asking you to make sure there are consequences for that choice. At exactly 4 p.m., Grandfather led me into the board conference room where 12 of the most powerful people in academic administration were waiting around a mahogany table that looked like it belonged in a Supreme Court building. I recognized several faces from university publications: Dr. Elizabeth Hayes, former Secretary of Education; Judge Robert Martinez, Federal Appeals Court; Dr. Patricia Williams, President of the National Science Foundation. Ladies and gentlemen, this is my granddaughter, Autumn Calder, the victim in the scholarship fraud case we're here to discuss. For the next 45 minutes, I presented my evidence to a room full of people who collectively controlled billions of dollars in educational funding and policy. They asked sharp, detailed questions about the timeline, the family conspiracy, the documentation, and the federal investigation. Dr. Hayes leaned forward when I finished. Miss Calder, this board has a policy of zero tolerance for academic fraud. However, given your family connections, some people might suggest that we're being overly harsh to avoid appearing to show favoritism. How would you respond to that criticism? Dr. Hayes, if this board shows leniency because I'm related to the chairman, you're sending a message that academic fraud is acceptable as long as the perpetrators have the right connections. That would undermine every legitimate achievement earned at this institution. Judge Martinez nodded approvingly. Ms. Calder, are you prepared for the possibility that your family members may face significant criminal penalties? Your Honor, I'm prepared for my family members to face the same penalties that any other criminals would face for committing the same crimes. Dr. Williams spoke up. Ms. Calder, the Pemberton Foundation has indicated that they're considering whether to continue their partnership with universities that have experienced this type of fraud. Are you aware that your cousin's actions could affect funding for future students? Dr. Williams, I believe the Foundation's concerns would be greater if they learned that universities failed to prosecute fraud when it was reported by victims. Tolerating fraud hurts far more future students than prosecuting it. When the questioning ended, Grandfather asked me to wait outside while the board deliberated. I sat in the hallway for what felt like hours, watching late afternoon shadows stretch across the campus where I'd spent the happiest and most productive years of my life. At 6:30, the board conference room doors opened. Grandfather emerged first, followed by the other board members, their expressions uniformly serious.
Miss Calder, Dr. Hayes said, the Board of Trustees has voted unanimously to support full prosecution of this case. We will be issuing a statement tomorrow morning announcing that Millbrook University has zero tolerance for academic fraud, regardless of the perpetrator's connections to the institution. Judge Martinez added, we've also voted to establish the Autumn Calder Academic Integrity Scholarship, funded by the recovery of damages from this case, to support students who demonstrate exceptional commitment to ethical academic achievement. I stared at them. You're naming a scholarship after me? Grandfather placed his hand on my shoulder. Autumn, you did something extraordinarily difficult today. You chose institutional integrity over family loyalty, knowing that it would cost you relationships with people you love. That kind of moral courage deserves recognition. Dr. Williams nodded. Miss Calder, you've reminded us why these institutions matter and why protecting them requires difficult choices. Your scholarship will ensure that future students understand that academic integrity isn't just a policy, it's a principle worth defending. As I walked out of the administration building, my phone buzzed with messages from family members who'd somehow learned about the board meeting. Angry texts, desperate voicemails, accusations of betrayal, threats to cut me off from family gatherings. But for the first time in days, I felt something approaching peace. Because I'd just watched some of the most respected people in higher education validate what I'd known from the beginning, that merit matters, that fraud destroys trust, and that protecting institutions sometimes requires sacrificing the people who've corrupted them, even when those people raised you. Especially when those people raised you. Tomorrow, the federal investigation would begin in earnest. Tomorrow, my family would start facing the consequences of their choices. Tomorrow, Delilah would learn what happens when you steal from someone who understands the difference between justice and revenge. But tonight, I was going home to pack for Harvard knowing that I'd earned my place there the same way I'd earned everything else in my life, through my own merit, documented with my own evidence, defended with my own courage. And no one could ever take that away from me again. The first wave of family retaliation hit my phone at 7:23 a.m. the next morning. I woke up to 47 missed calls, 83 text messages, and a voicemail box so full it wouldn't accept new messages. The university's official statement had gone out at 6 a.m., and apparently, my family had spent the night coordinating their response. The statement was professionally worded, but devastating in its implications. Millbrook University announces that it has referred a case of scholarship fraud and identity theft to federal authorities for criminal prosecution. The university maintains zero tolerance for academic fraud, regardless of the perpetrator's connections to the institution. A federal investigation is ongoing. Dad's voicemail was first. Autumn, you have no idea what you've done. Do you understand that I could be disbarred, that your mother's nonprofit board positions are at risk? Call me immediately. We need to fix this before it goes any further. Mom's message was pure emotional manipulation. Sweetheart, I didn't sleep all night thinking about how we got to this point. I know you're hurt, but you're destroying people who love you. Delilah called crying, saying she'll kill herself if she goes to prison. Please, please call me. We can work this out as a family. Uncle Mark had left 3 increasingly desperate messages. Autumn, I don't know what your parents did, but I barely helped with research. I could lose my medical license over a Google search I did for family. This is insane. You need to call the prosecutors and tell them I wasn't really involved. But it was Aunt Rebecca's message that revealed just how coordinated their damage control effort was. Autumn, we've hired a crisis management firm. They say the best option is for you to issue a statement saying this was all a misunderstanding that got blown out of proportion. The firm can draft something that protects everyone while letting you save face. Call me immediately. A crisis management firm. They'd hired professionals to help them manipulate me into retracting my accusations.
I was still scrolling through the messages when my doorbell rang. Through the window, I could see a delivery truck and a driver holding an enormous flower arrangement. The card read, "Autumn, I'm so sorry for everything. I never meant to hurt you. Please give me a chance to make this right. I'll do anything to fix this. Love, Delilah." 20 minutes later, another delivery. A basket of expensive gourmet foods with a card from my parents. "We love you no matter what. Let's find a way forward together." Then came the courier with a hand-delivered letter from a law firm I didn't recognize. Inside was a formal retainer agreement and a cover letter explaining that concerned family members had hired attorneys to represent my interests in resolving this matter quietly to prevent further damage to all parties. They were trying to buy me a lawyer to convince me to drop the charges against them. My phone rang again. This time it was a number I didn't recognize, but when I answered, the voice was familiar.
Autumn, this is your cousin Rachel from Oregon. I know we haven't talked in years, but I just heard about the family situation. Rachel was Uncle Mark's daughter, someone I'd barely spoken to since childhood. How did you hear about it? Mom called everyone in the extended family. There's been a conference call going on since 6 this morning. Autumn, I need you to understand something. Uncle Mark is talking about suicide. He says his medical practice is finished, that he'll never recover from criminal charges. Rachel, Uncle Mark helped plan a fraud that stole my future. I'm not responsible for his mental health crisis. But you are responsible for how far you take this. Everyone makes mistakes, Autumn. You don't have to destroy the entire family over one mistake. One mistake? Rachel, this was weeks of planning involving multiple family members who all decided my achievements were disposable. Look, I get that you're hurt, but think about the bigger picture. Think about family gatherings, holiday celebrations, weddings, funerals. Do you really want to be the person who tore apart 3 generations of family relationships? After I hung up on Rachel, the calls kept coming. Cousins I hadn't heard from in years, family friends, even neighbors who'd apparently been recruited to reach out on my family's behalf. Each call followed the same script. Acknowledge that I'd been wronged, minimize the severity of what happened, emphasize the consequences for innocent family members, and pressure me to be the bigger person by dropping the charges. At noon, there was a knock on my door. This time, it wasn't a delivery. It was my maternal grandmother, someone I'd always adored and respected. "Grandma Helen," I said, genuinely surprised to see her. "What are you doing here?" "Autumn, sweetheart, I drove down from Portland because I'm worried about you. May I come in?" I let her in, and she immediately began the most sophisticated guilt campaign I'd encountered yet. "Darling, I've been thinking about this situation all night. You know, when I was your age, family meant everything. We didn't have the luxury of destroying each other over money." "Grandma, this isn't about money. It's about fraud and identity theft." "I understand you're using those words, sweetheart, but what really happened is that your cousin made a desperate mistake and your parents tried to help her. Yes, they should have involved you in the discussion, but does that really justify sending them to prison?" She sat down on my couch and patted the cushion next to her. "Darling, I've lived through the Depression, World War II, and raising 5 children on very little money. I've learned that family is the only thing that really matters in this world. Everything else, achievements, recognition, even justice, is temporary. But family is permanent. The family that was permanent betrayed me. They stole from me and then tried to gaslight me into believing it wasn't theft. They made a mistake, darling. People make mistakes when they're desperate. But you have the power to show mercy, to be the healing force this family needs. What about the healing I need? What about accountability for what they did to me?" Grandma Helen's expression hardened slightly. "Autumn, sometimes being an adult means accepting that life isn't fair and moving forward anyway. You're young. You're brilliant. You'll recover from this. But if you send your parents to prison, if you destroy your Uncle Mark's medical practice, if you drive your cousin to hurt herself, you'll never recover from that guilt. So I should feel guilty about the consequences of crimes I didn't commit, but they shouldn't feel guilty about the crimes they did commit. I'm saying that you should consider whether revenge is worth destroying the people who raised you, who sacrificed for you, who love you despite this conflict. After she left, I sat in my living room surrounded by flowers, gift baskets, and legal documents, trying to process the coordinated campaign my family had launched to manipulate me into silence. They'd hired crisis managers, lawyers, and emotional manipulators. They'd recruited extended family members, friends, and respected elders. They'd sent gifts, threats, promises, and guilt trips. But the most disturbing part wasn't their desperation. It was their complete inability to understand why what they'd done was wrong. Every message, every call, every guilt trip was built on the assumption that family loyalty should override justice, that my achievements were less important than their comfort, that I should sacrifice my future to protect them from the consequences of stealing it. They still thought this was about money. They still thought this could be resolved through negotiation and emotional pressure. They still thought I was the same person who'd always prioritized family harmony over personal justice. My phone buzzed with a text from Agent Morrison. Miss Calder, we're aware that the subjects of this investigation may be pressuring you to recant your statements. Please document any such attempts and forward them to our office. Witness intimidation is a federal crime. I looked around my living room at the evidence of my family's manipulation campaign and smiled for the first time all day, because they'd just provided me with documentation of additional federal crimes, and more importantly, they'd shown me exactly how far they were willing to go to avoid accountability for what they'd done. They thought family pressure would break me. They were about to learn that their pressure campaign had just strengthened my resolve to see this through to the end.
3 weeks later, I was sitting in a federal courthouse waiting to testify in the criminal proceedings against my own family members when the first vindication arrived by email. It was from Dr. Patricia Pemberton herself, the pharmaceutical heiress whose foundation had been defrauded. Miss Calder, after reviewing the investigation findings, the Pemberton Foundation Board has voted unanimously to award you our first ever Institutional Integrity Award, along with full graduate fellowship funding for your Harvard PhD program. Your courage in reporting fraud against your own family demonstrates the exact principles our foundation exists to support. Dr. Patricia Pemberton, President. I stared at the email, reading it 3 times before the words fully registered. Full funding for Harvard. Not just tuition, but living expenses, research funding, conference travel, everything I'd need to complete my PhD without financial stress or family dependence. Agent Morrison approached my seat in the courthouse hallway. Miss Calder, I have updates on the case status. Are you ready to hear the results? I nodded, though my hands were shaking slightly. Delilah Hartwell pled guilty yesterday to federal charges of identity theft, scholarship fraud, and falsification of federal documents. She'll serve 18 months in federal prison, followed by 3 years of supervised probation. She's also permanently banned from receiving any federal educational funding and will be required to pay full restitution of scholarship funds plus damages. What about my parents? Your father pled guilty to conspiracy to commit fraud. He'll serve 6 months in federal prison and face disbarment proceedings. Your mother pled guilty to accessory charges. She'll serve 4 months home confinement and community service. Both are permanently banned from any advisory roles with educational institutions. Uncle Mark and Aunt Rebecca? Dr. Mark Calder pled guilty to conspiracy charges. He'll face medical license suspension and significant fines. Rebecca Hartwell pled guilty to accessory charges and will lose her nonprofit board positions. The scope of the consequences was staggering. My family's attempt to steal my future had destroyed their own futures instead. Miss Calder, there's one more thing. Bradley Calder was cleared of criminal charges, but he's voluntarily testified about the family meetings and provided additional evidence about the planning stages. He wanted me to tell you that he's deeply sorry for his involvement. Agent Morrison handed me a folder thick with legal documents. These are civil settlement agreements. The university is recovering damages, the Pemberton Foundation is recovering costs, and you're entitled to compensation for identity theft and emotional distress. The total amount exceeds $200,000. I opened the folder with numb fingers. Financial settlements, legal judgments, court orders, the paper trail of my family's destruction, all caused by their decision to steal from me. Miss Calder, I want you to know that this case will be used as a template for prosecuting academic fraud nationwide. Your documentation and testimony have helped us build prosecution standards that will protect future students from similar crimes. 2 hours later, I took the witness stand to provide victim impact testimony at Delilah's sentencing hearing. The courtroom was packed with family members, university officials, and media representatives covering what had become a national story about academic fraud and institutional integrity. Judge Patricia Reynolds asked me to describe how the fraud had affected my life and future plans. Your Honor, this case has taught me that some people view other people's achievements as opportunities for theft. My cousin didn't just steal money from me, she stole my identity, my reputation, and my sense of security in institutions I'd trusted. But it also taught me that there are people and institutions willing to defend merit-based principles, even when it's difficult and costly. Miss Calder, do you have any comments about the defendant's sentence? I looked directly at Delilah, who was sitting at the defendant's table in an orange jumpsuit, no longer the confident young woman who'd lounged by our pool planning her theft. She looked smaller somehow, diminished by the weight of consequences she never imagined would find her. Your Honor, I hope that this sentence sends a message that academic fraud has serious consequences, regardless of the perpetrator's family connections or social status. I also hope that it demonstrates to future students that reporting crimes against them is worth the personal cost, because justice systems exist to protect people who earn their achievements honestly. After the sentencing, I walked out of the courthouse to find Professor Martinez waiting on the steps with a copy of the latest issue of Science magazine. Autumn, I thought you'd want to see this. The cover story was titled, "The Calder Case, How One Student's Courage Transformed Academic Fraud Prosecution." Below the headline was a photo of me at my laboratory bench, surrounded by the research equipment I'd used to earn the scholarship Delilah had stolen. Professor Martinez, this is surreal. It's not surreal. It's deserved. Your case has already influenced policy changes at universities nationwide. The Department of Education is implementing new fraud detection protocols based on your documentation methods. You've probably prevented thousands of future fraud cases.
That evening, I received a call from Harvard's graduate admissions office. Ms. Calder, we wanted to inform you that Harvard University is establishing the Autumn Calder Fellowship for Academic Integrity, funded by donations from alumni who were inspired by your case. This fellowship will support students who demonstrate exceptional commitment to ethical academic achievement. You're naming a fellowship after me? Ms. Calder, you've reminded the academic community why these institutions matter and why protecting them requires moral courage. The fellowship will ensure that future students understand that integrity isn't just a policy, it's a principle worth defending, even at personal cost. The next morning, I found Grandfather Theodore sitting in my campus coffee shop, reading newspaper coverage of the trial. When he saw me, he stood and embraced me tightly. Autumn, I owe you an apology. For what? For not teaching your parents and their siblings the principles that you demonstrated throughout this ordeal. For somehow raising children who thought family connections were more important than institutional integrity. Grandfather, you can't control other people's choices. You can only control your own response to those choices. Which is exactly what you did. You chose principles over people, knowing it would cost you relationships with family members you loved. I chose justice over comfort. There's a difference. He smiled sadly. There is a difference, and I'm proud that you understand it in a way that your parents never did. What happens now with the family? Now we rebuild, based on principles rather than connections. The people who deserve to be in your life will understand why you did what you did. The people who don't understand weren't worthy of your loyalty in the first place. As I walked back to my dorm to continue packing for Harvard, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Autumn, this is Bradley. I know I don't deserve a response, but I wanted you to know that watching you stand up for what's right changed how I think about integrity. I'm proud to be related to you, even if I don't deserve to be. I thought for a moment, then typed back, integrity isn't about deserving things, Bradley. It's about choosing to do what's right even when it's difficult. Thank you for your testimony. That night, I received one final email from Dr. Sarah Chen at the Office of Academic Integrity. Ms. Calder, the university has received over 300 applications for the Autumn Calder Academic Integrity Scholarship. Students from across the country have written essays about your case and how it inspired them to report fraud, stand up to pressure, and choose principles over convenience. You've started a movement. I read the email twice, then saved it in a folder I labeled Evidence of Impact, because sometimes the most important vindication isn't legal or financial. It's knowing that your choices have inspired other people to choose courage over comfort, justice over family pressure, and institutional integrity over personal convenience. Tomorrow, I would start my PhD program at Harvard, funded by my own merit and the recognition of institutions that value integrity. Tonight, I was going to sleep peacefully for the first time in months, knowing that justice hadn't just been served, it had been weaponized to protect future students from the kind of theft I'd experienced. And that was worth every relationship it had cost me. 2 years later, I was standing in my Harvard laboratory at 11:47 p.m., analyzing data from my latest green chemistry experiment, when my phone buzzed with a message that brought the past rushing back into focus. It was from Delilah, just released from federal prison after serving her full 18-month sentence. Autumn, I know I have no right to contact you, but I'm required to make restitution as part of my parole. I've been working in a prison education program, helping inmates prepare for GEDs. It's taught me things about merit and achievement that I never understood before. I'm not asking for forgiveness, just for a chance to explain what I've learned. Delilah. I set down my pipette and stared at the message for a long time. 2 years ago, her name on my phone would have triggered rage, betrayal, the sick feeling of violation. Now, it mostly triggered curiosity. Not about reconciliation, that ship had sailed when she forged my signature, but about whether someone who'd built their entire identity around shortcuts and manipulation could actually learn to value earned achievement. I didn't respond immediately. Instead, I walked to my office wall where I'd hung 3 framed documents: my Harvard PhD program acceptance letter, the Pemberton Foundation's Institutional Integrity Award, and a newspaper clipping about the academic fraud prevention policies that had been implemented nationwide because of my case. Reminders that sometimes the worst things that happen to you become the foundation for the best things you accomplish. The next morning, I had a meeting with Dr. Elizabeth Warren, the Harvard professor who'd become my doctoral advisor and mentor. She'd specifically requested to work with me after my case made national news, not because of the media attention, but because of what she called my demonstrated commitment to institutional integrity under extreme personal pressure.
Autumn, she said, reviewing my latest research proposal, your work on sustainable pharmaceutical synthesis has the potential to revolutionize drug manufacturing. But I'm more interested in your plan to establish fraud prevention protocols in academic research. Tell me about that. Dr. Warren, the thing I learned from my experience is that fraud happens because systems assume good faith. My cousin was able to steal my scholarship because no one imagined that a family member would forge someone's signature and steal their identity. We need systems that can detect fraud without assuming that everyone is lying. And you think your background in this area gives you unique insights? I think my background has taught me to document everything, trust institutional processes over personal relationships, and understand that protecting merit-based systems sometimes requires making enemies of people you love. Dr. Warren smiled. Those are valuable skills for someone planning a career in research integrity. After our meeting, I walked across campus to the coffee shop,
where I'd first told Grandfather Theodore about my Harvard acceptance 3 years ago. He was waiting for me at our usual table, looking older but more peaceful than I'd seen him since the trial. "How's the PhD program treating you?" he asked. "It's challenging, but exactly what I wanted. I'm learning that the hardest part isn't the science, it's learning to trust my own judgment when other people try to pressure me into compromising my standards." "Sounds familiar," he said with a rueful smile. "Speaking of which, I have news about the family situation." I tensed slightly. Grandfather and I had maintained our relationship throughout the legal proceedings, but we'd agreed not to discuss other family members unless absolutely necessary. "Your parents' appeals were denied last week. Your father's disbarment is final, and your mother's ban from nonprofit board service is permanent. Your Uncle Mark lost his medical license for 2 years but can reapply for reinstatement." "How are they doing financially?" "They're surviving. Your father is working as a paralegal while he considers whether to try to rebuild his career in another state. Your mother has started a small consulting business helping families navigate legal challenges. They're learning what it means to rebuild a reputation after destroying it." "Have they said anything about understanding why I did what I did?" Grandfather's expression grew sad. "Your father still believes you overreacted to a family misunderstanding. Your mother thinks you were right to be upset but wrong to involve authorities. They love you, but they don't understand you. And I love them, but I don't respect their choices. That's the difference between unconditional love and unconditional trust. Love can survive anything, but trust has to be earned back." That evening, I finally responded to Delilah's message. "Delilah, I appreciate that you're trying to make amends, but I'm not interested in a relationship with you. However, if you're serious about understanding merit and achievement, I'd suggest you look into the academic fraud prevention protocols that were developed because of your case. Understanding how your choices affected other people might help you make better ones in the future." Her response came quickly. "I've already been studying those protocols. I'm actually applying to community colleges now, planning to earn my degree legitimately this time. I know it doesn't undo what I did, but I wanted you to know that prison taught me the difference between taking something and earning it." I didn't respond to that message, but I did save it. Not as forgiveness, but as evidence that consequences sometimes teach lessons that love and loyalty never could. 6 months later, I received an invitation that changed my perspective on everything that had happened. Harvard was hosting a national conference on academic integrity, and they'd asked me to be the keynote speaker. The topic? When Personal Cost Serves Institutional Purpose, a case study in whistleblowing. Standing at the podium, looking out at an audience of academic administrators, federal investigators, and academic integrity officers from across the country, I realized that my family's betrayal had accidentally given me a platform to protect thousands of future students from similar crimes. When I reported my family members for scholarship fraud, I thought I was just seeking justice for myself. I didn't realize I was participating in a larger conversation about what academic institutions owe to the students who trust them with their futures. The question isn't whether we should report fraud when we discover it. The question is whether we're building systems that make reporting fraud safe, effective, and worthwhile for the people brave enough to come forward. After my speech, a young woman approached me, a sophomore from Ohio whose roommate was pressuring her to falsify research data for a joint project. "Miss Calder," she said, "I was afraid to report it because I didn't want to destroy our friendship. But your case helped me understand that some friendships aren't worth preserving." "What did you do?"
I reported the research misconduct to our academic integrity office. My roommate was suspended, but 3 other students came forward with similar stories about her. Apparently, she'd been pressuring multiple people to help her cheat. How do you feel about it? Relieved. And proud. I learned that protecting something bigger than myself was worth losing a relationship with someone who was using me. That night, I called Grandfather Theodore. "I think I finally understand what you meant about building institutions that serve principles rather than people. What do you mean?" "I used to think that reporting my family was about getting justice for myself. But tonight, I met a student who was inspired by my case to report fraud in her own situation. And her report protected
other students from being victimized. My personal situation became part of a larger system that protects people I'll never meet. Autumn, that's the difference between revenge and justice. Revenge serves the victim. Justice serves everyone. As I hung up the phone, I looked around my apartment. My books, my research notes, my diplomas and awards, the life I'd built through my own merit and choices. None of it would have been possible if I'd chosen family loyalty over institutional integrity. But more importantly, none of the students who'd been protected by improved fraud detection systems would have been safe if I'd chosen personal comfort over systemic change. I'd started this journey trying to get my stolen scholarship back. I'd ended it helping to build systems that would prevent future thefts. Sometimes the most personal betrayals become the foundation for the most important principles. And sometimes the family you lose isn't worth the family you find in institutions that share your values. I picked up my phone and drafted one final message, not to my family, but to the Academic Integrity Office at Harvard. I'd like to volunteer to mentor students who are considering reporting academic misconduct. I think my experience might help them understand that choosing justice over comfort is always worth the cost. Because the best way to honor the price you've paid for your principles is to help other people afford to pay it too.